Hi guys, it's Christy again. This week I'm going to be doing a new Ancients figure for you because it's been a while since I did the last one, I think, and I like Ancients figures. They're fun and easy and usually pretty rewarding to paint. And last week's model, that Batman figure that I did, was really complicated. There were a lot of new techniques in there and stuff that was honestly new for me. So, scaling it back a little bit this time around is nice. So I've got this model here. He's from Wargames Foundry. This is sort of a Spartan, I don't know, elder or general or whatever you want to call it. This is a very simple, but I think really bold kind of graphic model with the long cape and that shield that he's holding in front of him. And so I think it shouldn't be too hard to paint, but it will really look good when it's done. And because it is so simple, you probably noticed, I'll show you again, I didn't paint his hands or his flesh yet, so I'll be covering that in this tutorial as well. And along the way, because he's a Spartan, there are all these cliches kind of associated these days with how Spartans looked, and I'm going to try to steer away from those and paint him, if not in exactly an authentic way, in a way that I think is more reasonable, so no kind of lambdas on the shield. But I probably will go for a red cloak just because that's so iconic, and there actually is evidence in the ancient sources to support the fact that Spartans did wear red cloaks. So I think that is something that I just really can't skip, basically. So I'm looking forward to this one, and I hope you like it and enjoy following along as much as I'm going to enjoy painting it. Okay, so to start off with, as usual, here are all the paints you're going to need for this Spartan general, and these do include the colors that are required for his skin tones. I'm going to start out here by base coating all of his skin areas using Vallejo brown sand. You'll probably need to apply several coats just because over the black base coat it's going to be a little bit transparent. Now, as always, when I'm painting skin, I'm going to apply a heavy wash of Citadel Reichland Flesh Shade just to build up extra contrast and depth. And here I am going in with a 50-50 mix of the brown sand and Iraqi sand. And I've got it pretty thin so that it's good and transparent, and I can kind of apply a couple layers. And I'm going to start picking out and sort of highlighting his skin. I always kind of start with toes and fingers and really carefully define those when the paint is still nice and thin and workable, and then I move on to other areas. So if the paint gets a little bit thicker later on, it won't matter as much on those areas because I don't have to be quite so precise. I'm pretty much covering all areas with this color. It's really just more a matter of degree, that is how heavy the coat is that I put on, and whether I build up several layers or whether I keep it thin and kind of spread it out more. I'm now going to take some thinned down Vallejo Black Red and use that to add extra contrast in some of the really deep shadow areas. So between his toes and fingers, around his eye sockets, his lips, all of those kinds of places. And also really you can use it on any areas where his skin is going to be transitioning to another area. So like sort of around the edge between his face and beard, or just sort of around the tops of his feet, sort of where they go underneath the cloak, for example. I'm now going to continue highlighting using just pure Vallejo Iraqi sand. And again, I've thinned the paint down considerably, and I'm just going to be building up some layers on areas where I want some highlight. Luckily, this guy's pretty straightforward to paint in terms of skin because there's not actually all that much showing. So, you just kind of can pick out fingers and toes, the high areas of the face, like the nose and cheeks and the lips, and his fingers, of course. And on his arm, I'm sort of highlighting the top of the arm and then just kind of making sure it's slightly darker underneath. My final highlight on the skin is a mixture of the Iraqi sand and some Vallejo ivory. And this is particularly important on his face. You can see I'm applying it to his lips and on his nose and the sort of the top, very top of his cheekbones. And then on his hands, I'm kind of really working it on his fingers, particularly the tops of his fingers, because those fingers, you know, they really need to be defined really well, particularly. Same goes for his toes, his ankles, and you can see I'm also carefully highlighting on the real top of his arm. When you want to put a highlight in an area like that, you know, you should always apply a small amount, less than you actually think that you want, because you're going to kind of spread it out. And that way, you know, once you've kind of blended it outwards, it'll be about the amount you want. And if it's not quite as bright or as heavy as you wanted, then it's easy enough to just kind of go back over it again and apply another sort of layer to lighten it up even further in the middle. But at least that way, you're going to get a nice, smooth, blended transition. I'm base coating his linen cuirass here using Vallejo khaki. In order to highlight his linothorax, I'm going to make a 50-50 mix of the khaki and some Vallejo ivory again, because I want kind of a warm color. And you can see I'm just kind of carefully picking out the separate areas, really only leaving the pure khaki down in the deep shadows, or kind of to define the different areas. And then to continue my highlighting here, I'm just going to gradually add more and more ivory into the mix and sort of gradually blend and build up layers on those surfaces of the armor. And I'm going to finish with one just final high highlight of just pure ivory once I get all the way done. Now, these linothoraxes were frequently decorated with colors and patterns and such. And you can choose to do that, but I decided I really wanted just to leave it white, because there's a lot of other colors and things that are going to be going on in this figure, and I just wanted a sort of a very nice, simple, light color there to draw the eye and sort of contrast with everything around it. But again, you could definitely choose to put like red stripes or dashes or some other kind of pattern on some parts of this armor. Now I'm going to base coat the entire cloak using black red again. This should be a straightforward process. It actually took me probably longer than it should have, because I was real sloppy with it. I wasn't paying a lot of attention when I was working, and so I was applying the paint in kind of a whole bunch of areas where I didn't want it and getting it on the skin and stuff. So I had to go back a lot and kind of wash that off with water, which you're going to see me doing several times here maybe. But again, this really shouldn't be a difficult thing to do. You just need to be a little bit more careful than I was. Now I'm going to start highlighting the cloak. Now, normally I would use Citadel red paints for the highlight, but I wanted to do something different here because I wanted a more kind of brown or kind of madder brick red type shade on this cloak, because that felt more ancient to me. So I made a mixture here of Vallejo saddle brown and Vallejo flat red. It's mostly saddle brown at this point, but I've kind of reddened it a bit extra with the flat red. The other thing I really wanted to try was to just experiment a bit more with Vallejo red paint, because I haven't really used it for a while. And I have to admit, my last experiences were less than positive, but it was a really long time ago, and that was really old paint. And I have kind of a feeling that Vallejo kind of paint formulations have changed and kind of improved since I last used their red tones. So I wanted to kind of try them out again, and I think they are definitely better. It really shows. You can see that they have better pigmentation, better coverage than they used to. They're still not perfect, but they're definitely a lot better. So, and on this point here, it's not even very much of a problem, because that subtle brown in the mixture it's a really good, well-covering pigmented color. So, you know, you can mix some red into it and you still get good coverage. So I'm starting out with it really thin, and then you can see I'm kind of sort of building it up once I get the first layer on, so I can kind of better define some gradual kinds of folds and creases and such in the cloak. In order to highlight further, I just really took a bit more of the flat red and made that mixture that I had in my last step, well, redder. And you can see I'm just going to go back over and start just gradually building up more and more bright layers of color on the cloak. And like all reds from all manufacturers, they're always really transparent colors, so that can be irritating when you want good coverage, but it's great when you want a nice smooth blended look like this, because you can really get a gradual smooth transition. Just keep adding these thin layers of red until you get the effect you want. I then moved on to just pure flat red here. Again, it's pretty thin and transparent by itself. Since there's no more of the saddle brown in there at all, it really goes on thin, and you can see how it really is quite shiny. It does not really dry matte. It dries quite satin, which is kind of irritating. Obviously, that's not the final finish you want, for one thing, and for another, that shininess, kind of reflectivity, really gets in the way of kind of seeing what the final product is going to look like, and it basically interferes with kind of you judging what color you're at. But I am just kind of going through here and just applying more and more layers of that red and really building it up sort of on the tops, especially of the wrinkles and folds in the cloak and anywhere where light is hitting. And I'm just applying more and more layers and just gradually brightening up so that I get this really smooth, really gradual, nice transition. Now I've got this really nice smooth transition in the red, but I feel like you need this sort of extra sharpness to it almost to really make it pop. So what I've done here is I've taken some ivory and mixed it into the flat red, and I'm using that now as an edge highlight, just very carefully. I'm just putting very thin lines kind of around the edges of the cloak, but also sort of very thin on the tops of very high sharp folds and stuff. And I do blend it in where necessary. I don't want it to look too stark, but it may seem like, you know, it is kind of a pink color I've got here, and that may seem ugly, but when, you know, it does still make a really good sort of highlight for that red. And I think it's just necessary. You need this sort of extra level of color that you can't get just by applying gradual layers of red. But again, as I said, it really will work best if you apply this very sparingly and like really just thin lines. I'm now going to do a little base coating with black. I'm going to apply it to his beard here. He's got these lovely, long, luscious locks of hair, and I want them to be, you know, nice and even looking. And you just have to be a little bit careful here because they kind of fall over his cloak. So you need to make some, you know, effort not to, you know, mess up your red cloak painting that you just did. Just make sure they're nice and smooth. The other area that I'm base coating black is the rim of his shield. So not the middle sort of convex surface, but just that sort of outer edge. Now I'm going to be base coating this sort of central part of his shield with a 50-50 mixture, again, of that saddle brown and the flat red. And I'm just trying to first make sure I get a nice even coat. Once that's on, I'm then going to go back in with just pure flat red and sort of try to highlight towards the top of the shield so that it looks slightly brighter up top, and then it's a little bit darker towards the bottom, because I like that sort of gradient effect, a smooth gradient effect when you've got these sort of flat decorated areas like we're going to be doing. Now I'm going to start working on the pattern. Now this design, I talked about in the introduction, you often see a lambda on a sort of the traditional thing on a Spartan shield, and that is not very accurate. I mean, to be fair, it seems like they probably did use lambdas on their shields at some point, but I think the evidence for that is for a much, much later period in history. They weren't really being used at all. It's sort of the earlier kind of, you know, I don't know, classical period, you know, when 300 happened and that kind of stuff. That was kind of pre that sort of thing. But this design I am painting here is a design that is associated with Spartans. We have seen it on, I think there's evidence of this design on vases or art that comes from, you know, a Spartan area. So we know this is a pattern they used. What you saw me do there, I'm using the black to kind of define where the design is going to be, sort of to plan it out. It's not all going to stay. So that outer line, the outer circle, is really just there to show me how far to go with those sunbursts I'm making. And the black dot in the middle is not going to stay black either. Again, that's just to define where it is. But then you can see what I'm doing is taking black and a mixture of kind of light gray mix, which I made with black and white, and I'm sort of carefully plotting out these slightly curved sunburst strokes. And you can see once the design is plotted out, I'm going back in and covering up the black lines that were only there just sort of as guidance. So that outer circle, you can see that's going away. So those red spokes sort of just continue all the way out, and there's no sort of line separating them. So I'm just kind of neatening up the red here. And I'm also going to take that central circle and make it red as well, because it's not supposed to be black either. But when I was initially first painting the design, it was easier to make it black because I could see kind of better how big it was going to be. But you know, I don't need it anymore, so now I'm going over it. And I'm just generally neatening up all the lines here using the black and gray colors just to make sure they're smooth and even, and they end kind of nicely as best as I can manage. Now I'm going to be highlighting the shield design a little bit more. So I'm taking the pure flat red here and using it to highlight the red areas that are sort of towards the top of the shield, because again, as I said, I always kind of want it lighter to the top and then darker at the bottom. So I'm building up the flat red in layers there, also over the sort of central circle, and just kind of it takes several kind of coats of this, because as we've seen earlier, the flat red is very, very transparent. And I'm highlighting the other sort of color areas similarly. So the gray spokes are getting highlighted with white because they're actually supposed to be white overall. They're not really supposed to be gray. So they're actually all going to be painted with a thin coat of white, even the ones at the bottom. But those ones towards the top of the shield, I'm going to put extra layers of white on so they get really bright and it looks like there's a little bit more light hitting them. And as for the black spokes, I'm just going to make a really dark gray mixture by taking a bit of white and sort of slightly cutting my black so that I get a dark gray color. And I'm going to use that then to highlight sort of the spokes at the sort of top of the pattern and make them sort of this sort of darkish gray as opposed to black. And I'm also going to use that same dark gray to highlight sort of the rim of the shield, you know, up towards the top, and then make sure down at the bottom it's just going to stay black. Now the other feature of this pattern is there are actually around that black rim lots of little white circles with black centers. So I'm going to first plot them out using my really light gray color. Again, I'm just kind of making the small circles as evenly as I can here all around the outer edge of the shield. I'm then going to highlight particularly the dots towards the top of the shield by plonking a little bit of white into them. I'm then going to grab a number 0 brush and some real thin black paint and very, very carefully put a teeny tiny little black circle in the center of the white dot. This is really a little bit fiddly, so if you have trouble with this, you can always skip it, or like me, you can go back in and sort of clean up the white areas around the black dots so that you get everything nice and even. Now I'm going to highlight his beard and hair, and I'm going to be using the number 0 brush for this too. You can do this with similarly by overbrushing and some washes, but if you want a really neat, nice finish, you're going to get the best results just doing it by hand with a really tiny brush, especially when the hair is really well defined and sculpted like this. I took basically some black here and just made it slightly lighter with some ivory, and I used the ivory instead of white because I wanted to give the hair a little bit of extra warmth and not make it such a cold gray color. So I kind of applied that to pick out the locks. I'm also going to use the same grays to highlight the base of his horsehair crest, so it's going to be kind of a dark gray. And I'm just going to add a little bit more ivory, so I gradually lighten it and just go back in and further sort of highlight and pick out the strands of his hair. And use that sort of same light gray as well to apply sort of a bright edge highlight along the top of the crest holder. Now I'm going to work on the brass bronze areas. So I've taken here a mixture of German camouflage black brown and some Vallejo Air gold, and I'm going to base coat the handle of his sword and also of course his helmet, which obviously has to be bronze. Once I've got that base coat on, I'm then going to go back in with just some pure Vallejo Air gold and sort of kind of carefully highlight it. I'm going to keep it thin so that I can build it up a little bit and sort of just gradually get some shinier areas in some places and kind of some just darker areas in other places. I've now grabbed some Vallejo Air Steel and mixed it into my Vallejo Air Gold, and I'm using that as a kind of final bright edge highlight, which I'm applying very sparingly to some areas of the helmet where I want real extra emphasis or really make it look like it's super shiny. Be careful here, as I've always said when doing metallics and applying this sort of highlight, don't go too heavy. I'm then going to work on the steel of his sword blade. Often I would do this with sort of separate shades of gray, but because I don't want to get out any more paints than I have to, I'm just mixing my own gray here with black and white, and then I'm adding some Vallejo Air Steel into it to get it kind of metallic-y. And then I'm just going to lighten it a little bit with some more Vallejo Air Steel, make it a little bit more metallic, kind of build that up on the blade. And you see, so I'm just kind of going lighter and lighter, and I'm actually not even using very much metallic paint. I'm just kind of just working with gray almost, just a little metal in it. And then I'm going to just take some pure Vallejo Air Steel and kind of thinly work over that once I've got the basic sort of tones in place to make it shiny. And after I applied it, sort of the steel, mostly the top blade where the light is coming from, I then emphasized the underside of the blade by making it even darker, just by mixing a darker gray and sort of applying it to that side more, and that just added more contrast and made it, you know, just pop out more. Finally, I want his horsehair crest to have kind of a nice warm color, so I'm going to start out here by base coating it with a mixture of Vallejo khaki and ivory. And you can see I'm going to have to apply a couple coats here just to get good coverage over the black. I then build up some contrast by taking pure ivory. I'm not thinning it too much. I want it to be thick so it doesn't flow too well. And I'm going to kind of overbrush the horsehair crest, really focusing the lighter color on the top of the crest and along sort of the top side edges. You want kind of near the base to look a little bit darker and just a little bit more faded out. I then took a thin overall wash of Seraphim Sepia from Citadel and applied that all over the crest, but I really focused it towards the bottom because I really wanted, you know, to get that sort of stronger sense that it was darker near the crest holder and lighter towards the top. And once the wash dries, you can go back in again, and I would recommend this, in fact, with some more pure ivory and do another sort of overbrush just to get rid of all of that Seraphim Sepia. Okay, so here is our finished Spartan warlord with shield and sword. You probably noticed that he's an awful lot matter, and that's because once I finished, I applied a coat of matte varnish. And that was largely to deal with the red because, as you saw, it's quite satin when it dries, and that is not an attractive look. It's not what you want, and it won't make a good finished figure. So I really had to get rid of that, and that's why I used the varnish. But I think overall it tends to improve the look of the entire figure. This figure was easy to paint, as I predicted, and it was a lot of fun. I especially enjoyed the shield design, and it's probably the thing that really makes the figure exciting and interesting because it's otherwise quite a basic thing with just some nice red blending, some nice looking hair effects, and that really snazzy pattern. And it may seem intimidating to do a geometric form like that, but in the end, you know, when you see something like that, your best, you should just kind of just give it a try, even if it seems scary, and often it'll turn out a lot better than you think it might. So, you know, don't be afraid to experiment a little bit with painting those things, because that's how you get better at them. So if you enjoyed this video, please like it, please share it, of course, leave me comments with what you thought, as always. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you can keep up with, you know, my updates. So that's all for now, and I'll see you next time.